to do with the similarities between out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and alien abductions, and adding in entity encounters, dimethyltryptamine entity encounters. They're too similar. They seem to have similarities here. Now, I know that way back in 1984, I think it was, Kenneth Ring wrote a book called The Omega Project, NDEs, UFOs, and Mind at Large. So even the researchers, the great NDE researchers such as Ken Ring, have been making these links in the past. Also, I know that Raymond Moody was also very interested in a lot of the linkages between the NDE experience and UFOs. And I think it's to do with how how it manifests. Now, again, you and I were both at Breaking Convention last year, and I met a number of people there that I spent a lot of time talking to who'd had entity encounters when they were children. And this particularly intrigued me because a lot of my research is to do with other forms of entity encounters with children. Children, when they encounter what a character called Michael J. Halliwell called quasi-corporal companions, QCCs, or more jokingly, the Invisi kids. And this is where children have friends, invisible friends. And we know lots of children have had these. And it's because the imagination of a child is broader. But not only that, I'd argue that from the experiments I was talking about earlier on, there's something else about children's brains that's of profound importance here. And again, I'm probably one of the few writers in the world that's talking about this. And it's to do with myelination of the brain and myelination of the neurons. Now, the neurons, I think, are there to, as we said, close the brain down, to stop you having a broader experience of reality. Myelination is the insulation of the neurons. It's like, imagine a neuron's like an electrical cable. In order to keep the electrical current inside, you need to insulate it. And this is what myelin does within the brain. It insulates the neurons from the outside world. But for children, they don't have that myelination. It starts when they're a child, which means that their neurons, and I'd argue their astroglial network, is open far more to other stimulants, other ways of seeing the world. And this is why children have great imaginations. This is why children feel there are ghosts under the bed. You remember as a child, the world you lived in as a child was timeless. Time went forever. The summers lasted forever. And the beings and things you saw seemed to be real. Now, I believe there are some people, as they get older, they don't, the myelination maybe doesn't happen in quite the same way. And they continue to be able to perceive these entities as they get older. Now, initially, they will interpret them as being playmates. They'll interpret them in many ways. They won't have the cognitive ability to link them to greys or aliens, because they won't know about that within their worldview. But as soon as they start to do this, suddenly they'll start making associations with these entities, and they will label them as being aliens. Now, the amount of times you have in near-death experiences, which I believe at the point of death, the brain then opens itself up again. And this is why we have the near-death experience. And again, I haven't got time to go into the neurochemical factors in this, but I do in the book. But suffice to say, the near-death experience is similar to having an alien encounter or a DMT-facilitated encounter, because it seems to be like an out-of-body experience. A lot of people, when they have alien encounters, suddenly find themselves being risen up out of the body and being sucked into a device that's above them. Or as a child having an out-of-body experience, it's the same sensation of rising up out of the body. Then we have the out-of-body experience, one of the moody traits of the near-death experience. So there's all this out-of-body experiencing going on. But when people are in out-of-body experience, they encounter other entities. And these entities seem to be similar. Now, particularly, I'll cite the example of my own mother. when she had an entity encounter one evening. She phoned me up the next day to say that she'd woken up in the middle of the night, she couldn't move, and the door was open to her bedroom. She then saw 3 spindly fingers come through the bed, both behind the bedroom door, and this creature, and she described it as having huge black eyes, 2 holes for a nose and a slit for a mouth, and it looked at her and dodged back. My mother wouldn't know a grey if it bit her on the backside, okay? But she saw one. She described exactly that. Now, in my presentation, I'll be showing children's pictures, children's drawings of greys. Children see greys all the time. But it's not just children. There are cave paintings that were recently discovered in northern India. And in these cave paintings that have been sealed for 3,000 or 4,000 years, the cave paintings have alien greys.
Absolutely, yes.
And this is because the shamanic tradition, children will be taken and will be put in darkness. And they're put in darkness for a reason. Because darkness stimulates the pineal gland to release endogenous, that is internally generated dimethyltryptamine. It's that brings about the hallucinatory states that people have in near-death experiences, out-of-the-body experiences, and everything else. It's endogenous dimethyltryptamine, and it's synthesized from melatonin. So melatonin, they're very, very similar structures in terms of their molecule shape. So what happens is that you go into what my mother's state was called sleep paralysis, when you cannot move.
Very common, yes.
And it's profoundly common. And it's there to stop you damaging yourself when you're dreaming, when you're in the dream state. Now, there are friends of mine who are incredible out-of-body people. There's a number of my associates, and there's somebody else I know that you must interview, is a researcher called Samantha Lee Treasure, who's going to have 2 books coming out in the next 18 months that are going to really blow people's minds. And Samantha had experiences as a child in her farm where she lived in Ontario in Canada, where she encountered entities. She now has out-of-body experiences where she sees her own future self. She goes to a place called Future Tokyo. She encounters entities, she encounters spirits, she encounters lots of things. But again, she's doing the science. So there seems to be something here that there's linking. And it's to do as much as anything with electrical sensitivity, something we started the conversation on. It's as if electrical sensitivity triggers our abilities to see these entities in one way or another. So near-death experiences are OBEs under different circumstances. Entity encounters are the same throughout society. Seeing angels, they're all the same phenomenon. And once we start seeing the patterns, we're going to be able to make it the solution.
If you enjoyed this clip and would like to dive into the full episode, then simply click the link below.